Alice, thank you very much for your time and your support. You know that we have founded this center together with colleagues from psychology, economics, sociology, and we want to promote education and we promote good research in collaboration with practice with organizations. And you have been a professor of social psychology for 40 years or longer. You've been at different institutions. You completed your PhD in 1965 at Michigan.
Yes.
And then you held professorial positions at Massachusetts. You've been visiting professor to Harvard. You've been in Germany at Tübingen University.
Right.
You've been visiting professor at Amsterdam.
Right. Yeah.
You've received many prizes and awards. You are fellow of many of our societies like the APA. You've received awards for your writings like Through the Labyrinth, won the gold medal of the American Psychological Foundation. You try to reach out to practice in your books, in your writings, and your presentations. Today we are interested in your view on leadership in general, and maybe also on your topic, gender and leadership, of course, and your personal experiences with leadership. The first question is maybe a little bit provocative. I'm always asking, do we need leadership? Aren't we all intrinsically motivated? Aren't we researchers and scholars good examples of people who don't want leadership? And can we generalize it? Or what do we need leaders for?
Well, we do need leaders in organizations because they have such complex tasks, and so there is coordination needed at a minimum. You know, so you have a complex task, maybe in manufacturing. You're building automobiles. Well, oh my, that's complex, isn't it? You have to have many different parts of the organization. You have to design and accounting and manufacturing, and you've got factories. So if it was leaderless, it would be lost. Our university, let's take a university where you have all these different disciplines and you have students and classes. And so it doesn't just work without a structure, and then the structure has to be designed, and then it has the daily life of the organization has to go on in a fairly orderly way. And so then we do need leaders just for coordination, but also, for motivation and other kinds of processes. So it's a very simple world in which there's little leadership. Anthropologists, they study this, and they say, or they have documented in the very simplest of societies, foraging societies, where people do hunting and gathering, and they live in relatively small groups. In the simplest of those, there's virtually no hierarchy. And so there is sort of informal leadership. You could grow, up and be a sort of responsible person, and your adult life you might be regarded as a wise woman or a wise man. But there's no chief, as in then when tribes got more complex, evidently they needed leadership to coordinate the various activities, and so they got to the level of chiefs. And then as you get, more complex societies, there's many forms of leadership. So I think it goes with social complexity, but even a small amount of complexity creates a need for leadership. Yeah.
So if we need leaders, what would you define as good leadership in these more or less complex world societies, organizations? What differentiates good from not so good leaders?
Right. Well, if you look at the end product, there's a sense in which good leaders get the job done. So if it's an organization, the organization functions well on a daily basis, plus it has good outcomes. Say if you're manufacturing automobiles, you manufacture nice automobiles that people buy. Otherwise you fail, the organization will fail. So good leadership would have to create that positive outcome. Our university successfully educates lots of students who go out and are very successful in life. Then it has to work through these processes whereby leaders understand how to design and coordinate these units and structures, how to motivate people, how to coordinate. So leadership is sort of multi-process, multifunctional in a large organization. Leaders often inspire. They're good role models. They are able to motivate and mentor and to create conditions under which people in their organization thrive in various ways. Because if they thrive, rather than oppressing them, they will be better workers. They will be better colleagues. So it is a complex task, depending on the level of leadership as a small team versus an organization.
But creating the right situations or the right structures, motivating people, inspiring people, if you think that that's the essence of good leadership, do you think everyone can become a good leader? Is it trainable, learnable?
Well, I think it's nature and nurture. That it may be that intrinsically some people are going to be have more of the sort of temperamental qualities, like they're more extrovert. I think they have to be to some extent extroverted and maybe sort of the other agentic qualities. I mean, I think everybody doesn't start out on the same ground, but then there's a lot of success in formally and informally, training people. Of course, modern organizations may have leadership training going on that's rather formal, but I think in the larger world, people often learned by example. They were in an organization and they saw somebody doing it in a way that seemed to work, and then they sort of modeled themselves after that person. And so if you have none of that, you haven't had formal training, or you haven't sort of observed leadership firsthand in ways that were positive, then it may be sort of hard, even if you are sufficiently sort of temperamentally suited. So I think it's nature and nurture, and that it's pretty trainable, But maybe you can't make everybody into a star,
So you talked about role models that we need. Who has inspired you? Who have you encountered that was a model for you in terms of good leadership?
Well, I'm a professor, so the only real leadership role I've held, a formal role, was as the head of a department of psychology, the whole department of psychology. So it's a managerial role, not high in the structure of a university, but nonetheless important because it was a pretty large department. And so in terms of directly inspiring me, I was far along in my career at that point, so I'd seen many department chairs and deans and university presidents, and some of them were better than others. So I did sort of take some lessons from them, and as a woman, I of course was always interested to see how women performed, and I did have one department chair, unfortunately fairly briefly, because she moved on to another university, but this was fairly early in my career when I was at Purdue University in the psychology department. Betty Capaldi was her name, and she went on to become a provost at a couple of universities and is now, but so I guess it was the first department chair I'd had who was a woman. And so she had a very positive spirit and a lot of good humor. And so I noticed when I went to talk to her, I always had a good time, and she kind of had a way of solving problems. So she was a sort of very positive a very likable, extroverted woman, and she had the sense, not that, the psychology department is being blocked or we can't get what we want, the negative approach, but the positive approach, that her job was to make things work for people. And I thought, wow, that's refreshing. And so I sort of carried that away in terms of a personal mode. I don't think I ever did things as well as she does them, but I certainly carried that away as a model that I scored, partly because she was a woman, but just also because she was doing a really great job.
you as a leader, when you were department chair, or now when you lead your team of PhDs and postdocs, what do you think is particularly good? How do you lead, and how would you say this is helpful, useful?
Yeah. Well, I try to be positive. I think it's good to be a booster, especially as department chair, to give the message that I think this is a great department and we're getting greater, sort of a bit of the charismatic, and trying to symbolize and of the good qualities of a psychology department, and then to have confidence in people. But then there's a lot of problem solving, there's a lot of managerial part to it. So one of the things I did, because it was the psychology department that I led was very undermanaged in that many procedures had remained very informal, which is not necessarily bad, but if you have a graduate program and you sort of never have a document describing the rules and things like that, that's undermanaged. So I also had a sense of a managerial responsibility to make the department work more smoothly in a way that's more transparent, and that is there ultimately fairer when procedures are transparent, sort of dividing various resources and everybody knows how it's done and they know how much resources we have, then that's more transparency and more fairness. So that was another one for my teams, because I think, inadvertently a lot of procedures in that department had been sort of just kind of personally arranged, not to be unfair, but still it could end up that way because some people won't ask for resources. They're, they just go along. Other people are in there saying, give me this, give me that. And so then if you don't have any sort of system for making it fair that everybody accepts, then, the system ends up being unfair and ultimately some people are unhappy. So I think that was one of the themes. I tried to bring that forth and make it a bit of a legacy for my period of time.
Do you think that's a female thing to approach things? To create procedures that are fair to everyone and transparent? Whereas men traditionally use the old boys' networks to get what they need.
Yeah, you can exercise more direct power if you keep it all to yourself as a leader. And so if to the extent that men might be more motivated like to hold power, that's how department chair would do it. You have to come to me and I may or may not give you your travel money or whatever. And my notion was that everybody should know how much travel money we have and let us agree what the, who would have under what circumstances access to it. And so, and maybe we would give more to the more junior faculty than the senior faculty who should raise their own money, whatever. And so, I don't know if that's a female thing, but I think to some extent it made it in the sense that women have had less access, and and in some areas of society and maybe within universities feel that things have not been entirely fair. I think it might be a little more typical. I don't actually know that.
Well, you were describing your own leadership, good leadership. Makes intuitive sense. I mean, everyone would subscribe to good leaders are positive, are fair, create transparent and good situations. And if you say, and it's trainable, most of us could learn to become a good leader in that sense. Why, on the other hand, do we see so much bad leadership? Why do people fall ill and are demotivated at work? Why is that?
Well, we have a lot of amateurs being leaders, of course, particularly in universities, because people, they're educated to be professors in their disciplines, and they may be good scholars, but then all of a sudden they're department chair. Now, in a field like psychology or in other science fields, we often work as teams, so you have a bit of direct experience. But let's say you're a scholar in history or English, where there's more just working on your materials, more individually. And so if such a person, okay, you're suddenly department chair, or some other leadership role, there's the assumption you might have observed how to do it, but not necessarily, because you might have just been thinking about your work, and then teaching. But so we do have a lot of amateurs. I think universities are particularly prone to that. But then in other kinds of organizations, there may also be similar problems that people don't have much background. You assume they've picked it up. But some people pick it up more than others. Maybe people who are interested in leadership might pick it up better. And then there is the power corrupts part of it. There's research. A colleague at Northwestern, has done a lot of it in recent years, but it appears that when people do get into powerful roles, they may become, in a sense, corrupted, but they become less fair and they become less attentive to other people's needs in various ways. And so that's, in a sense, good leaders don't let that happen, but it can happen.
What do you find personally most challenging or difficult? Can you remember a situation where you made a mistake and learned from it, or currently leading other people, like PhD students? Is there anything you think that's probably the thing that we should invest most when we train leaders?
Sometimes I've been too harsh or too demanding. I mean, it's hard when some work is maybe not up to what you expect, and then maybe you think the person hasn't invested enough time in it. And then, so of course properly you want to motivate in a very positive way. There's a lot of potential here, but sometimes I think I got annoyed and was not as positive as I could have been. And there is that, and just as a leader, understanding, to be a good leader, you have to be in tune with what the people who are being led, in a sense, want. There has to be this agreement at the level of goals and values and that. And, just that matching. So, and sometimes it's, possible to miss that a bit. I thought this was a great initiative, and then it doesn't get sort of a tepid response. And then in retrospect, I realized that I should figure that out better.
Okay. Values is a good keyword, because that's my last question. In the modern organizational world, do values matter? Do they play a role?
Well, I think they make a lot of difference, that people do have these broader goals for society, the society they would like to live in, is one notion of values, and more they're at the more individual level. I suppose one's ultimate life goals could be conceived of as values. What are you doing anyway in your career or your family life? There are those broader notions.
But all these organizations have their mission statements somewhere in the entrance hall, and do these statements that all refer to values, I guess, matter for the people on the shop floor?
Well, they only matter if they're actually shared, I think. So an organization could say, we are very progressive, we are very friendly to the environment with this and that, but if the people in the organization, those need to be values they shared for the organization to actually bring them forward. And so, but then if they turn out to be false, that if the organization says we do this, we do that, and then the people in the organization can see or they can be very disappointed, which would lower people's motivation. So, there's a lot of sort of ethical breaches in modern corporations, I would say, perhaps, particularly in the United States. We've had such horrible scandals sometimes about misuse of funds and, whatever. Promoting drugs that were, ended up being damaging, and the company actually knew 10 years ago, and that sort of thing. And then And so the company no doubt would have these good goals that were public, but then when they actually were unethical or not socially responsible, that's obviously a failing, which could be really damaging internally as well as externally, firing or whatever. Yeah, so I think that when leadership is effective, the values are shared about many levels, and then that helps people to be committed and motivated. They think this is a good organization, and I'm proud to work here, and I want to promote these values through my work. And so and leaders should symbolize that, of course, for the organization as role models. So yes, I think that level of thinking about leadership and organizations is very important.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.